I want to echo this idea of collaboration and group effort. This is really what I've been working on for some time now, the idea of support for new kinds of group activity, and that's what I want to talk about today. I've written a book called Here Comes Everybody. It came out in paperback just a few days ago. There are copies over there, but I will save you the trouble of reading it by giving you the 5-word summary. Group action just got easier. The thesis of the book that our new set of tools, the internet, mobile phones, applications layered on top of them, have changed the way groups come together, find each other, share things, get things done. I want to talk about that change, and in particular, I want to walk up a ladder, the same ladder that I walk up in the book, of sharing, collaboration, and collective action. Essentially, how much does the individual have to give up in order to participate in the group action? Because we're seeing really all kinds of group effort, down to the simplest sort of, let's just all pool our stuff together and see what we get, Flickr, YouTube, these kinds of things, all the way up through Wikipedia, up to then real collective action in a political sense. So I'll start with sharing. I'll start with the simplest example. So here's a photo, as you can see, of an island in the sea. It was created, I shouldn't actually say it's a photo, it's an image. It was created using a technique called high dynamic range photography, probably the room where I at least need to explain this. High dynamic range photography is where you take multiple exposures, you use software to combine them so you get the brightest brights from the brightest exposure, the darkest darks from the darkest, greenest greens, and so on. Done right, it looks like a cross between a photograph and a pre-Raphaelite painting. Done wrong, it looks like a box of crayons threw up. So there's a real premium on technique. And so this photo, someone creates it, this image, someone creates it, and then up it goes on Flickr, the photo sharing site. And this is an HDR discussion area. And you can see that around the photo, an entire thread develops. Right. Every object on Flickr can also be the anchor for a conversation. And without being able to read that half-point agate type up there, you can see what happens, which is the conversation starts, someone posts a question, then it gets longer and longer, and then someone says, hey, this is Flickr. Right? I can actually insert other photographs into this conversation. And the thing which starts with a sort of, hey, I like that shot, how'd you do that, turns into a group tutorial on high dynamic range photography. Right. And this is what the sociologist Etienne Wenger calls a community of practice. It's a group of people who come together to get better at something together, to figure something out. And what this group is doing for each other is instructing one another in various techniques of high dynamic range photography. Now, in the old days, a new technique would come along, it would be used by high-end photographers, and then it would appear in photo magazines, and eventually it would trickle down into a variety of darkrooms. That process would take between 5 and 10 years, depending on how complicated the equipment was and so on. With Flickr, it took about 3 months for high dynamic range photography to be something that was sort of at the edges of people's consciousness, to a technique that was fairly readily available, right? So this is the first thing this has done is it accelerated the process of creating communities of practice, of creating groups that come together around digital artifacts to get their work done. But it's also reversed the order in which this used to happen, right? The old pattern was gather and then share. Right? Let's first figure out who's interested in high dynamic range photography, and then we'll form a group or a club or whatever. We'll get everybody in some room, and then we'll all talk about it. On Flickr, the pattern is share, then gather. Right? The group that came together to talk about high dynamic range photography didn't know in advance that they were interested in that, and they didn't know in advance that they were interested in each other. They were actually attracted to the digital object first, and the community came as a result of the object, not the other way around. Put another way, in a medium where broadcast communications and two-way conversational communications take place in the same medium, every URL is a latent community, which is to say every piece of data, every service online, in addition to whatever value is there from going there and looking or reading or watching or listening, there's also value in figuring out who else has gone there and getting those people to talk to each other. The people who first gathered around this photo then turned into a group that created this kind of communal value. Right? And that That change is enormous, right? We used to have a big separation between I'm going to broadcast images and then conversational clusters are going to form around those images. But those clusters were typically in real time and real space, right? What Flickr does, and by analogy what the web does, is it says for any given digital object, you can find the community of interested people anywhere they are in the world. And when they talk to each other, the value of that conversation can persist well beyond the time that they're doing the talking. It's like a water cooler conversation that turns into a tutorial that then persists and turns findable, right? I found this through Google. I wasn't part of this conversation, right? And that bootstrapping of social value around digital objects is one of the big changes now.